welcome back to Connect and Conversations. I'm your host, Evelkah, and I am joined today by the amazing Alan Holmes. Funny story, we met a couple of months ago, almost a year ago now, and it's been a journey for us to get here, but I am thrilled to have him on the podcast. And in this podcast, we're keen to talk about all things transitions and what that means in a workplace, but also in terms of our ability to cope with change and be able to explore how that change is beneficial to us as we move forward in our careers, in our personal lives, how that change may even impact our interactions and engagements with others as well. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with Alan today. Alan, let the guests know a little bit about you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, firstly, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation, particularly because it's taken us so long to get here. So for those who don't know me, and I imagine it's probably most of the folks out there, I am a global head of D&I for a law firm called Clyde & Co, and I've kind of been a D&I careerist. So for the last 15 years, I've worked in D&I roles in a number of different organizations spanning from defense, the legal industry, financial services, and the third sector as well. So I've seen a lot of the similar challenge and a lot of the different challenges in different types of organizations. But I had the luck to fall into this sector a relatively long time ago, very, very early in my career. And have just grown in that space ever since. Really enjoyed it, really, really loved having the opportunity in order to help change systemic issues that people are facing and ultimately, make a more inclusive world, inclusive environment, and inclusive workplaces as well. So for me, it really is a joy to get to do what I love and continue to get to do it at an amazing law firm as well at the moment.
Amazing. Thank you. And you said you've worked in the space for quite a long time, and I know I haven't worked in the space as long as yourself, but I've definitely had my fair share of working within the inclusion, diversity and equity space. And we're talking about transitions more from a personal level, but when we look at the landscape of DE&I, even that has had its own transitions and evolution over the years. Can you touch a little bit on that, and how have you seen that evolution take place in terms of how we talk about D&I now? There's a lot of conversation at the moment that D&I is dead and things like that, and I'm kind of mixed feelings about it. But even when we're talking about that space, and this is probably a detour and more for me selfishly, but how can you describe it? What's your perception of that, journey that we've taken in terms of D&I in the last recent years?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, if I reflect on where I at least saw the industry 15 years ago when I was just getting involved in D&I, I think we were really in a place where D&I was understood as a quality at the time, quality and diversity as we were often referring to it. And it was predominantly at least in the UK, in public sector organizations that were focusing on it. And the roles that were created were usually, one person looking after quality and diversity for a pretty large organization, and was focused on raising awareness of lived experiences and celebrating awareness days. And I think, 15 years ago, that was probably the space that we were in. Over the last 15 years, I think that's changed really substantially. We're seeing a lot more private sector organizations that are really authentically invested in what we now, tend to call diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, there's a whole conversation to have around the terminology that everyone uses for what is the same topic. But we are in a place now where it is more broadly understood. More organizations are investing in it. I think the reasons for organizations investing in it have also changed quite substantially. I think 15 years ago, the organizations that were doing this work were really invested in predominantly the moral argument. And I think that's still right. That's what I believe. That's what motivates me on a day-to-day basis. But there are a lot of organizations now that are invested in it because they see the research of diverse teams can perform better when they're inclusively led. They understand that diversity of thought can lead to innovation, can lead to new products, and ultimately can lead to success in markets and financial success as well at that. So the messaging around why organizations are investing in this work, I think, has changed really substantially. And I think that's also meant that the work has changed, moved away from just being focused on awareness raising events and activities to really focusing on programmatic change that can lead to having diversity of thought in senior leadership teams. And that means having diversity in senior leadership teams. Diversity of thought isn't a brand to just describe a group of people that think the same.
Mm.
So I think we're seeing a pretty significant change. I will say one of the things on a global perspective that I think we see coming out of different markets around the world is a potential next step change in D&I. And we're almost at a bit of a crossroads,
Yeah.
which is, do organizations continue to invest in this work, enhance what it is that they're focusing on, and really think about programmatic change that they create, and in doing so having to really show the return on investment for this work?
Yeah.
Or particularly where we have key elections happening across the globe, does this become a political point where D&I is seen as being woke and should be something that we stop as organizations? So there is also a transition that I think we'll go through in the next few years as societies start to cement their understanding of what they think DEI is, and also then their position on it as a society as well. And I think that challenge is coming up, and that could be another transition for us to really think about.
Yeah, no, I think one of the pivotal transitions I've seen personally is the transition pre and post COVID. And I think that, there was a lot of noise, and, I won't get into the nitty gritty of what happened. Most people lived through it, but that was a significant ton of events that happened in terms of this space and industry. And it was so fascinating to see the take up at the time. But now it's just like, where do we go from here? And I think that's all part of what's happening now. We have all of this. We know all of the research. We have all of the evidence to prove why it matters. But where do we go from here? And that's so fascinating to see how now, as you've rightly said, different industries and companies have almost molded their own understanding about what it means and how to move forward, and use that as a catalyst to say, this is what it is, and this is what we're going to do as a result. So that in itself, the kind of change that's happening is very, very interesting. But I guess to kind of flip it on its head, when we look at ourselves personally, we do that as human beings. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your key transitionary periods that you've experienced, and what has that been like for you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, I think there's probably two that really stand out for me, one in the personal and one in the professional space. I think in the personal space, I identify as gay. I came out when I was 18, about in 2008. And that for me as a transition was moving from presenting a version of myself to my friends, to my family, to society, into actually discovering and identifying who I wanted to be and how I wanted to live my life, and how I wanted to express myself in situations. And that was an emotional toll. That was a pretty significant transition, because particularly when you're defining your identity, throughout puberty and in your late childhood stages, all the way through to teenagers into your 20s, at those moments, most people are kind of setting the foundations of who they're going to be. But for often a lot of people who aren't able to be out, the foundations that you're setting aren't necessarily the truth, right? They're not your core values. It's not really who you are. And therefore, what you end up presenting in your early 20s is a foundation that's built on, or is a house that's built on, a wonky foundation.
Yeah.
And some point that falls apart, right? And I think that's true of quite a lot of queer people. That as a transition, I think the biggest toll that has is an emotional one, right? It's very exhausting to present a version of yourself and to actually not really know who you are for quite a long period of your life. But I think it comes with a bit of a gift, which is you get at a point when you're a little bit more developed, kind of mentally in a later stage of life, you get the opportunity to really reflect on who you want to be, the values that you want to bring to your work, to your home, to your family. And I think that was a real benefit of that transition, as I got to do that later in life when I had a little bit more understanding about myself, and I really appreciated that. And then I think on a professional perspective, I mean, having worked in this industry for 15 years, I've now worked in, I think, 8 organizations delivering D&I work.
Yeah.
And each of those is a transition, right? Learning a new organization isn't always easy. It can take some time. And when you move from a corporate into a partnership, it's very different. You've got to learn how to think, act, and deliver in a very different way. So I think there's some really substantial transition that comes with moving from one organization to another. Even if you're delivering the same type of work, you end up really quite, off kilter sometimes, just by the way the different organizations operate and deliver, and
Mm.
then how you tailor everything that you want to do to those business practices and different ways of working. I think that can be incredibly stressful. For me, what I've found really has been personally so important is to kind of manage the amount of transitions that I'm going through at any given time. I'm quite in quite impulsive, as my partner would say, and I have a tendency to want to change everything all at once. So actually just making one or two changes at most, whether or not that be career, where you live, your
Mm.
relationships, all of those things, actually trying to manage the amount of transition that I've been going through at any point of my life has become a skill set that I've needed just to, quell my own thirst for change within life as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's funny you say that, because a lot of people don't like change. They don't, they get uncomfortable with it. And we've heard time and time again, change is uncomfortable. It's never meant to feel good or nice or pretty or whatever it may be. But the fact is, for you, it was just like, I go through this very often, that the fact that I have to take it back and reel it in a little bit to avoid how that may impact the people around you. And if we look at that, like, in from the two pivotal transitions that you've experienced, how has that impacted, or how has that translated in how you engage and interacted with
Mm.
close friends, family, colleagues?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, I have a point of view which says it's not change that people don't like, it's the impact of change, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
not the actual change itself, it's the fact that it's going to cause disruption, it's going to cause stress, it's going to cause you to feel, act, and experience things in a certain way that creates that discomfort. And not everyone will agree with that, and that's okay, but that's my point of view on it. So I think what has been key to me in my own kind of approach to dealing with that change and transition, as well as guiding other people, is to really think about, okay, how do I mitigate the impact of any change that I might be experiencing? So if I use another example of this, I mean, when I moved to Clyde and Co, it was a larger team, great investment. There's a huge amount of work to do here. It's a new firm. It's a new way of working. There's a huge stress that comes with starting any new role. And I think
Yeah.
everyone's probably experienced that. And it can create a really uncomfortable experience
Mm-hmm.
for sure. It's obviously also very exciting to be starting a new role. So how do you mitigate some of the challenge of that? Well, number one, it's going to be really stressful. I'm going to be working long hours because I want to put in the effort to get to know the organization. It's going to be a pretty challenge. And you've got to think, well, what's that going to do to the balance of my life? It's probably going to mean that I have less time to spend at home. I have less time to spend with my family. I have less time to spend with my friends. I have less time to spend with my partner, because I'm going to be spending more time getting involved at work and understanding projects until I get that in a state where it kind of settles down. So for me, managing the change that came with starting this role in particular is a really honest conversation with my partner Stuart, to say, I'm about to go through a really stressful period. I'm not going to have all the time to do things at home that I might do. I need some help within this. And having a really adult to adult conversation that says, okay, can you pick up more of the stuff outside of work, the home stuff
Yeah.
that needs done, because I might not have the time. And for me, I reflect on that and think about this whole narrative around work-life balance, and really strikes me in an uncomfortable way, because people, particularly women, I think are sold this lie of work-life balance. If you just find the perfect formula, you will be able to do everything that you want to do, achieve everything, and your life will be amazing. I think about it, and it's a bit of a buzzword, right? But I think about it as work-life unbalance.
Mm.
How am I going to decide where I put my energy over the next month, over the next week, over the next year? And that's going to mean that I can't put my energy somewhere else. And for me, that means having an honest conversation with the folks in my life and the people around me to say, you might be getting less of me me at this time because I'm going to be going through that change.
Mm.
Now, that's really helpful because once you contract and you have those honest conversations, what you then don't get is my partner saying, you're not spending the time with me. Why are you spending so much time at work? Because you've discussed it. You've talked about it.
Mm.
And that helps eradicate one of the major stresses of going through change, which is feeling like because I'm delivering more here, I'm not giving to my friends, I'm not giving to my family, I'm not giving to my partner. You've had that conversation, you've mitigated it. And then suddenly the uncomfortable things about change that we don't like feel a lot less uncomfortable because you've got that kind of social conversation and agreement with your, with your friends, your family, and your partners. And I think that for me has been key. And I try to make sure that when others are experiencing change, trying to think, okay, well, what is it? What's the root cause of the concern around change? What is
Yeah.
the impact that it's having on you? Get to that and then start thinking about ways that you can mitigate that through honest dialogue and conversations. And I think I've always found that
Mm.
quite helpful. But it goes, at the core, it's work-life unbalance, not work-life balance for me.
That's really, really interesting. And two things I'll pick up on what you've said is firstly, that communication and dialogue with people around you. I think for a lot of people, and maybe I'm putting myself in this bucket, but for the most part, we don't communicate about the change that we're about to embark. We just pick up and go because that's what we do.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we forget, and it's not intentional, it's not malicious, but we almost forget how this may impact. I remember from my own personal experience, I was living with my mom, my sister, and then one day I just said, actually, I'm going to move out. I'm going to go on my own. And then all of a sudden, within a matter of a month, I was moved out. And it was just like, and it didn't dawn on me. And I'm just like, my mom is just like, she's helping me, but this is all happening so fast. I got the move-in date now, got the deposit down, and it's just like, oh my goodness. And then it was time to say goodbye, and it was just like, I didn't actually prepared myself for all of this emotional
Yeah.
burden, um, or even kind of new way of interacting with my mom. Having to message most of the time now. Not being able to see because we're now living 2 hours apart. So all of that, I was so in the midst of, yep, this is what I'm gonna do, and then forgetting how that may impact my sister. Bless her, she always says that she misses me. She'll kill me if I say that out loud. But it's those things that we forget, and I think it's so important that when we are embarking on change, especially change that we are aware of and we are in control of, we're able to say to the people around us, X, Y, and Z is happening, or I'm moving here, or I'm doing this, or I'm going to this new job. Please be patient with me. I may not have all the time in the world, or so on and so forth, or this is how we can work going forward.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a crucial thing. And in general, I think we've lost the essence of communicating with one another. And that goes across the board. But secondly, I love what you said, work-life unbalance. And that is probably pretty controversial to say because people are convinced that there needs to be this. And and before we even started talking, I was telling you about doing multiple different projects, going to events, and then doing my master's essay. And it's just like, hold up. This is not work-life balance. This is work everything. Where's the balance in
Yeah.
all of this? And that combines with getting lack of sleep, not seeing friends and family, not going out, or just having downtime. And it's just like, where is the balance in that? And as you were speaking, I reflected on a conversation we had, that isn't released yet, but I'm sure people will see it in weeks to come. But instead of saying balance, we can talk about harmony. How can we live in harmony with the things that are going around us? Because in actual fact, when we think of it, there's nothing that is balanced in life. Things
Yeah.
will always be, up and down, and left, right, and center. And there is no such thing as a perfect balance. But what we can do or strive for, especially when we're navigating transitions or whatever it may be, we can find harmony in how we can ensure that everything gets the appropriate time, attention within the constraints or whatever you may have. I don't know, that was something that
Yeah.
you've made me reflect on.
Well, I think as well, it's about deliberate choice as well. And
Yeah.
I think when if you're striving for harmony by simply adding more and more and more onto the plate and saying, okay, well, I'm going to see my friends. I'm also going to go for the promotion at work. I'm also going to have a child at the same time. I'm also going to get a pet. I'm also going to see all my family. When you start piling everything onto harmony, it's just impossible. It's about making a deliberate choice around, okay, which of these things might be paused for a little while, which gives me the ability to focus elsewhere so that my life feels a little bit more harmonious. And I think when you
Mhm.
make that deliberate choice and you communicate it to the folks that it's going to impact, because choice impacts other people, then you end up with a much better solution, and one that feels authentic to you, who you are, looks after your own well-being, and makes sure that at the end of the day you're okay as well,
Mhm.
but also gives people insight into the reasons that you're making some of those decisions and maybe making some sacrifices here and there in order to progress in a certain area. But it's that
Mhm.
dialogue with yourself, the dialogue with the people around you, and then just being deliberate in the choices that you make.
Yeah, no, certainly. And I think, a lot of people, I shouldn't generalize a lot of people, but some people, I think, kind of let life go with them, without having that. And we can't control things that are happening, but we are given a choice as to how we're going to proceed in certain decisions or ways. I think about my own experience. Everything that I've done has been a deliberate choice as to what I wanted to do. And in life you get the things that just come out of nowhere, and you're just like,
Of
oh.
course, yeah.
But for the most part, we have a choice as to what direction and what lane we want to take. um but you briefly touched on well-being. How can we manage our well-being, our emotional state, when going through or navigating change or transition? um was there a time perhaps you've had a negative experience or reaction towards change or transition in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, when I moved to an organization a number of years ago now, still relatively early in my career, I was very much the workaholic, but also the socialite, and also wanting to do everything with family. And I was that, the plate piled too much, trying to do
Mhm.
everything. And very quickly, I mean, everyone's probably had one of these experiences, but I reached burnout pretty quickly. Burnout to the point because what I was sacrificing was my sleep and my well-being, because I was doing too much, that my immune system just completely crashed, and I caught an infection. It shut down my liver. I was in hospital for 3 months. Came out of hospital, thought I was fine, went back to work, pushed myself too hard. Within a week, I was back in hospital, and I was off again for another 3 months. So I've absolutely had that experience of going through some form of transition, which in this case was again, it was a new role that I just started, trying to do everything all at once and not really being honest with myself and honest with the people around me to say, okay, what can I actually do? What can I actually
Mhm.
achieve? While also prioritizing my own well-being, my own sleep.
Mhm.
So I've experienced that firsthand, and it's not a nice position to be in when you're seriously unwell. I think for me, that's giving me a really keen insight to look out for the indicators within my own well-being of when that's starting to happen again, so I can raise
Mhm.
the flag and say, okay, I can't continue down this path. But also to be able to try and notice it in others as well, in terms of their workload and how thinly they're stretching themselves across everything that they're doing in life as well. So I think having people around you who can help notice that, and I think being really open and transparent around what some of those indicators are for you as well. So I know that when I'm, particularly overstretched, or I'm finding change particularly difficult, that I tend to really close in, and I'll focus very specifically on tasks. Don't focus, as much on people. And I let people know that,
Yeah.
so that if they start seeing me do that, they're able to call out and say, have you noticed that you're starting to close in rather than open up? And that can be really, really helpful feedback. So I think trying to have that group of people around you who can
Mhm.
can help to do that, I think is really important. I mean, for me, my partner's been fantastic in all of the change. When my work becomes particularly busy, we're able to have a really honest conversation that says, can he pick up more of the workload
Mm,
in the home life, right? To be able to support me to not have to worry about that. And there will be times where we can't. There'll be times where we're both just so busy at work that we have to make another sacrifice. And often that sacrifice is a financial one to bring in some help and support so that we're not just bombarded with too much. And we're lucky enough to be in that position that we can afford to do that. And I recognize not everyone is able to kind of outsource some of the things that happen at home. But having, again, that dialogue that says, right, what's going on for you? What's going on for me? Where can you help?
mm,
Pick up the stuff that I might have to, that I would normally do in order to make my life a little bit easier. Do you have the capacity to do that?
mm,
I think doing that in your personal life and your professional life is really key.
yeah.
It's harder to do professionally for sure because there's always more work
Demand.
to do.
Hmm.
But trying to have some, particularly with the teams that you've got around you, have some indicators and boundaries around what going off track looks like for your own well-being,
Yeah.
I think can help set that dialogue where people can share and challenge when they see you going down. People will always spot it before you do, right?
Oh,
You're usually the last person to notice that you're unwell, and that certainly was the case for me. So, having people that can do that, I think, is really important.
yeah, no, definitely. And there's a key word you mentioned just now, and it's sacrifice. And it's funny because this week I have been reflecting a lot on what the sacrifice actually means and what do I sacrifice. I think for me, I'm going through this phase in my life where I'm now recognizing not every friendship is worth the friendship, not every job is worth the job, not every family member is worth the time. And when we're thinking about change and we're transitioning, there are, I think, for me personally, one of the biggest kind of elements is sacrifice and letting something go. Because in order for you to transition, in order for you to change, you're evolving in your own self internally, spiritually, physically, emotionally. And some things are not just meant to carry on with you until the day you pass. Let's be frank.
Yeah,
And things will drop off. There is the analogy about the rocket going up in the sky, and it has to let go of some of the weight in order to actually perform at its best. And I think for humans, we struggle with sacrifice. And I posted even just yesterday on kind of my social media, and I was just like, my word for this week is sacrifice. And I posed the question, what are you planning on sacrificing in order to reach your goals, in order to become a better person? And I think when we think about change, we think about when we are taking a new step, a new level, whether that's professionally, personally, it's okay to sacrifice some things. And, sacrifice is temporary. Some things may come back, some things may not. But the point is, you're able to let go of that thing to allow you to blossom and grow.
yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, can I say that analogy of the rocket ship, trademarked and stolen, first of all, because degree in astrophysics, I've never heard that analogy before, but I'll be using it daily from now on. I really like that. I think people really struggle with sacrifice because often it can feel really selfish, right? In terms of really focusing on yourself and making sure that you're in the best position to achieve what you want to achieve and also to support others. But the analogy that I really like in describing that is we get this really right on airplanes in the aviation industry, which is you have to put your mask on first in order to be able to look after someone else. Because if you start putting on other people's masks, there'll be a point where you can't put on someone else's mask. So unless you're looking after yourself first, you're not going to be able to be in the position to achieve what you want or to help other people. So selfishness is required if we want to be selfless as well, right? And I think people often forget that. But there are examples where we really understand it in principle. It feels really hard to apply it though in day-to-day life if you think you're going to be, having impact on others.
Yeah, it's so true. And, I think it's so important that there's a lot of debate around selfish and selflessness. And I think, you know, yes, we need to be selfless. And I think that should be the goal. Life is not about us. It's about, what we do. It's about the legacy. It's about our impact. And well, for me, that is. I shouldn't generalize and say that everyone aims, wants to do that. But I think as humans, that's what we should be striving for, is how are we going to take care of one another? How are we going to help your neighbor? How are you going to love your neighbor, and whatever it may be? And, I remember having the conversation with someone, and it was about, if I, and this is more from a romantic context, and it was around, I have to be able to love myself in order to know the love I want to receive. And if I don't love myself, I don't know what the expectation of love should be, and then I will just take any and anything. And if you say
Mhm.
love, it's love. But if I know what love means, if I love myself, and if I know what I deserve as a person, as an individual, as a woman, whatever, then I know kind of the baseline expectation, and therefore I'm able to love you in the same capacity. But you know like they will say, like, hate people, like, broken people hurt people. And if we look at it the other way around, if we love ourselves, then we're more likely to love others. So I think there is a requirement, like you said, to be selfish in order to become selfless, and I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Similar kind of experiences, before coming out,
Mm,
most people before they come out are in that space where they can't love themselves because they're taught that there's either nothing to love or it's not
mm,
right. It's an experience that many of us will have had. But then, when you're able to be more of your authentic self, part of that is a process around self-love and going through that. And when you get there, I think it really strengthens the relationships that you have with others because it brings that authenticity, it brings that ability to know, as you've just described, right, exactly what your self-worth is, and then also to project that outwards, right,
mm.
which attracts just positivity in return. So absolutely, I think we've all probably got our own examples of experiences of that. We don't often talk about it, and we certainly don't talk about it to each other, right? So that's one of the first key steps.
100%, and it goes back to the start of this conversation around communication and dialogue. We don't do enough of that. We're not vulnerable enough with one another to have these open, honest, authentic conversations. About what we're going through, about how we feel, about some of the challenges we're experiencing, or even some of the change. So, and I think, as a reminder, at least by bare minimum, what I hope people get from this conversation is, we need to have that conversation. We need to talk to each other about these things, because it impacts us in the long run, and we need to be able to see how we can help, and allow someone to be selfless for you. So
Absolutely, yeah.
it's such an important thing. But as we come to a close, I'm keen to hear kind of your golden nuggets, around how can we cope with transition in a time where things can be hard, or where transition can be seen as quite tough and difficult.
Yeah. Look, I think the first thing is a dialogue with yourself. Really honestly ask yourself, what is it about the transition that is uncomfortable?
Mm,
And that requires a bit of self-reflection, evaluation. Is it the uncertainty? Is it the stress that it causes? What specifically can you anchor as being what you're not enjoying or not going to enjoy about
mm,
a transition that might be coming up? And I think the second thing is, then once you've got that, is bring it to light. Bring it to light for yourself, examine it, share it with people, talk about it, and hear what strategies other people have in order to help, right? You will not need to design something for yourself. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. The coping mechanism that would help you probably exists in the world somewhere right now. So
mm.
the more that you talk about something and a challenge that you've got, the more people will be willing to help you and talk you through how they've approached it and how they found something that helps. So I think doing that with your friends, your colleagues, your family can only lead to you having a better experience with transition.
Yeah, no, certainly. And I think, um, for those out there, one of the coping mechanisms or strategies I employed, was seeking therapy. Like, that was something, especially within the Black community, is not
Yeah.
very. you know, supported by, or, encouraged, shall I say. So I remember even talking to my mom about it, and she was just like, "Why are you going to therapy? Like, what's wrong with you? Blah blah blah." And I'm just like, maybe you need therapy, woman.
But sharing that experience, right? That
Yeah,
then hear other people hear that that's a way of supporting you through change, right? And supporting you through an issue that you're having. The more people that talk about it, the more people that will understand it as a solution.
yeah,
And then suddenly you've got a lot of people who are investing in themselves and focusing more on making sure that they're getting the help that they need, right? And it's
yeah.
only through people like you sharing their stories that actually it will impact others to do the same thing.
100%. And I'm now such a big advocate of therapy. I'm just like, I would tell my work if I'm going to therapy and be like, yep, therapy session, goodbye. Um,
Yeah,
I am
good.
very open about it. And that, for me, I'm just like, it's honestly at a time where I was going through one of my biggest transitionary periods. I did therapy, and it was the best decision that I've done, and I'm so grateful for my therapist. But there are so, like you said, let's not reinvent the wheel. There are so many things out there to help us and to help us cope with these transitions, and all we don't need to look for. The internet is very much available for most people, and we can have access to that. And if you don't have access to the internet, I'm sure someone on your street or someone who knows someone, the connections and everything is just so prevalent. So there's so much that you can do. But Alan, thank you so much for
Thank you,
joining us
Evelkah.
on Connecting Conversations. It's been a pleasure having you, hearing your story, your journey in dealing and navigating change has been quite inspiring. And I think a lot of people will find comfort in the fact of your process in navigating that. So I really appreciate you sharing your story with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed the chat and speak soon for sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you.